Are you ready for a candid conversation with industry leaders? Are you ready to explore the latest trends and technologies impacting modern manufacturers? Are you ready for Chris Luecke in the Creators Lounge?
Right at the start, but we'll just be looking
The
at it.
Creators Lounge is proud to welcome Toolpath.
All right, I'm back, Chris Luecke, but more importantly, I'm joined by Al Whatmough with Toolpath. Welcome to the Creators Lounge, Al.
Thanks for having me.
You and I were chatting it up before we went live just a second ago, and I was telling you, when I do my interviews, as part of the show I run, Manufacturing Happy Hour, a lot of times I do them over a beverage. So I feel like the perfect way to start this candid conversation is, how do you describe what Toolpath does as if you're having a beer with someone?
You know, it's. I don't think you even knew this and what you're doing, because what we do is the wrong question. How we do it, how we do it is the right question.
Let's go there.
For me, and I was just saying this, but you don't buy a hammer to put it on a wall. You buy a hammer to make something with it.
Yep.
And when I think about a product, because Toolpath is a product company, we're making a product. I think about the part of the product we don't charge for the most, and that's the community and how do we support our users. And this ties into the fact that we're doing AI software, and I hope I'm not talking too much, but I think the fundamental challenge we need to solve is, how do we make people not walk up and cross their arms and say AI is here to take my job? Because it's not the case. AI is here to be a I guess an Iron Man suit, if you will. It empowers people to do more. It doesn't take jobs away, and we can go off on all kinds of tangents there.
Absolutely.
But the reason I say that is kind of the inspiration to the back of our booth is, if we were neighbors, would you come over to my house and have a beer?
Yeah.
And if you came over to my backyard and have a beer, would you trust me? So half of our booth is a backyard to play bags, as they say in here.
Nice.
And have a happy hour and build trust. And when 160 people can come play, they'll go home and tell other people they should trust us. So that I love the fact that you just intuitively picked up on, would we have a beer? But that's a good way to build trust, right?
Now I remember, because Ryan Kelly over at IMTS was telling me, he's like, if you've got time for another interview, you got to interview the guy in the cowboy hat over at Toolpath. They've got one of the best booths and one of the best technologies here. And before we go further, we really have to clear the air on this. It's wildly coincidental that your name is Al and you have an AI solution.
Yeah, I think Al Dean and I, like 10 years ago, started picking up on the AI jokes then. Now it's big time, so they told me to take my badge off, but I always put a capital L just to make sure.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't have the right font on there, that can get real confusing real quickly. So, well, tell us a little bit about your journey to Toolpath, because you're a machinist by trade, correct?
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of the background that got you to Toolpath.
It's kind of major deja vu coming to Chicago too, actually, because I was a machinist at the University of Western Ontario, and most of what we did was build models of buildings and bridges for wind studies. And so a lot of the newer buildings downtown Chicago, we would model and put in a wind tunnel. So even though I was a machinist, we were machining acrylic parts and lab setups for chemical engineering and that sort of thing. I did that for 5 years, and then transitioned into teaching high school. I taught high school shop and drafting for a couple of years. That evolved into creating video-based curriculum to teach people how to use SolidWorks, and that evolved into getting to know the HSM Works team. That cascaded into joining Autodesk and leading the Fusion manufacturing team for the last decade. Okay. And then just kind of kicked off the journey at Toolpath.
So you're at Toolpath, and one thing that I often talk about with folks, the advice I give when they go to a trade show is, whether you're an exhibitor, whether you're an attendee, you got to go into the show with a goal. And you went into this show with 3 pretty clear goals. Can you go over what those were?
Yeah, the first is, we want people to leave the show and say, AI for CNC is inevitable. It is. The next one is, they should see what we're doing and say, Toolpath is taking a pragmatic approach to the problem. And finally, we hope that they leave and say, I'm going to go home and try it out. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we're here on, let's see, it's day 5. I've lost track of what days it is. What is the general reception of the industry to what you're doing right now?
maybe I didn't have to have the expensive bags tournament. And what I mean by that is I was expecting a lot more resistance coming up, and I was expecting that need for the backyard and the beer was more necessary to kind of break the walls down. And it felt like when people came up to the booth, and it says right on it, AI for estimating and cam automation done right, and you'd think somebody would walk by and not stop, but everybody's stopping, probably because we booked our booth 2 months ago and got the one with a post in front of it, so they stop when they hit the post. But people are stopping and coming in and not very resistant, actually, to the conversation.
Yeah, I like it. Well, hey, we're going to be right back, but we're going to a sponsor break. We've got a lot more coming right back up.
Watching The Creators Lounge. Gain insights as our hosts talk to expert guests about key industry topics. Come see the action live on the trade show floor. Visit booth 338 600. See you at The Creators Lounge.
All right, we are back with Al. I have a question about your solution to kick things off. Paint a picture of the challenges that folks face in the manufacturing and how you're helping them solve that. Like, paint the picture of the story of what a situation looks like before and after Toolpath.
How long do I have to answer this?
Ooh, I would say give me your. We're finishing our beers in the backyard.
Yeah.
We got about 2 minutes before you got to walk out the door.
There's a lot of level setting. I think the first challenge is removing a lot of the FUD, but the main really thing is how do you be profitable, and how do you say no to the right things so you can say yes to the right things, right? I think oftentimes we think it's yes, spindle uptime, but to me, and this is something I learned as a product manager, it wasn't my job to come up with good ideas. It was my job to say no to a lot of good ideas and a yes to a few. And if I boil it down to a core problem, how do I say yes to the things that are a good fit for me so that I can make money on them?
I think that's a great style. So you're leveraging AI for cam estimating, correct? Just to be very clear about what it is.
So if we work the problem backwards, we're building a fully automated cam system. So if we can imagine we've built a system that can drive from here back to our hotels.
Yep.
But right now the system runs a couple stop signs.
Yeah.
So it's not the right thing to fully drive the car, but it's accurate enough to give you a full estimate. So what we're delivering to the market is working back from the problem. We've got the most solved to the least solved, but what we're building is the end thing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So the most solved part of the problem is, I'd say, is a no-go gauge for a shop.
Yep.
Upload a step file. It uses your tool library and identifies if that part is manufacturable with your set of tools to give you a quick no-go. It's a fit or it's not a fit for my shop. The next thing you'll do, if it's a fit, it'll generate an estimate. That estimate is based on an automated CAM program behind the scenes. Ultimately, a lot of the estimate comes in from the number of setups, so it's very unique that we can figure out how many setups. And even in a unique way, if you've got let's say a dovetail cutter versus not a T-sleeve cutter versus not having one, that could take a part from 2 setups to 6, for example. So when you have a part with a different number of setups, it has a significant change on the cost and the amount of human interaction you need.
Yeah. So
the estimating is the next level of completeness we have, and the part of the problem that's the least complete we'd call full self-driving maybe. So in that case, I almost think of it like post-processing out to Fusion. We'll dump out the tool paths into Fusion. It builds them as if they're native operations, and then you review it almost the same way 20 years ago at the beginning of CAM. You're reviewing G-code to see if the G01 and G02 and the safety blocks are in the right place. And we're a little ways off. Maybe we're probably 30 years ago for G-code, and we'll get closer. So starting from the tech is being built from full automation. The product we're delivering is from the what have we done best, no-go gauge, what are the tools, the estimate, and then finally the level of that we're still working on is the toolpath automation.
So like you were saying, if you're a product manager, if you're in a shop, this is going to be your go, no-go to figure out, hey, we do this or we don't do this, correct?
I think it's a super important thing to think about, and I'll blame Industry 4.0 and vanity metrics for spindle uptime. So we get caught up in this trap of spindle uptime is the biggest challenge, and then when you're estimating, is my runtime accurate? I'm hearing spindle uptime somewhere in between 20 and 40%. So if that is a reality, if you miss the quote on 10 minutes of runtime or 12 minutes of runtime, that 2 minutes is kind of irrelevant if nobody's standing in front of the machine. But what is relevant is if you looked at a part and missed the fact that you needed a small drill or a custom cutter that you needed to order, and so now it's going to cost you $2,000 to overnight it, and the machine's not doing anything for a day, you lose a lot more money on accepting a bad job than being slightly off on runtime for an automated machine. It's a personal opinion, but...
So you're catching the major things that would drive up the cost of a job versus focusing on, let's say, some of those little things that maybe we put a lot of emphasis on, but aren't the things that are really going to make or break the profitability of the job.
We're catching the little things that become major. The kinds of dyslexic mistakes that I would make, we're catching those in an automated way so that we can focus on the major things.
I like that. Catching the little things that become major. We got one more segment coming up after this. We'll be right back after another sponsored break.
Welcome to The World According to. Join me, Peter Eelman, and Travis Egan of AMT while we travel across the U.S. and talk with leaders of the manufacturing technology industry. Meet these renowned visionaries in personal, up-close settings. Hear how their passion for manufacturing took root and has continued to fuel the ideas that shape our industry today and tomorrow. Watch now and hear how these leaders answer the question, The World According to, only on IMTS Plus.
Hey, we got one more segment here with Al, and this segment is for you, the manufacturing leaders out there. We're going to get some of his sage advice, some of his tips for manufacturers. Let's start with one of the big themes of our conversation. How do manufacturing leaders get their teams to embrace AI, to not look at it as a threat to their job, but as something that's just going to help them be more successful in their jobs?
Yeah, I think for me, you need to say it with conviction and believe that automation doesn't take jobs away. I do deeply believe that. I think when we talk about things like a skills gap, we accidentally imply it will. Like we're solving the skills so we don't need skilled people anymore. I think we start by talking about it as a productivity gap. And any time you think about automation, that's what happens. The analogy that works best for me, and you might find another one, is an autopilot. When the autopilot came along and automated the mundane stick and rudder skills for the pilot, we didn't lose the pilot from the cockpit. The pilot actually became the navigator. And now the pilot is flying bigger planes, more planes. There's just as many planes, and they have a higher salary. Fast food comes along, there's more restaurants. You can't think of a good case where automation came along and it didn't make people irrelevant. It actually filled more demand, and the demand got bigger. So I think the first thing is to not just try it, but to embrace it and understand that when we make ourselves irrelevant, we actually free ourselves up to do more.
I have more of a career question. You know, you started as a machinist, now you're a CEO. what advice would you give to, let's say, manufacturers on the front line, operators, machinists, etc., to prepare themselves for anything, really? Or let's say prepare themselves for career advancement?
Stop thinking. I think the first one is stop thinking about the career advancement. The people that I've seen that overly focus on the career advancement sometimes make it, but it falters. For me, it's about relationships. For me, actually, and I sign all my emails, moving at the speed of trust. But as I think about automation, the more automated communications happen, the more important the handshake and the fist bump and the beer in the backyard are. I think a lot of times I'll always remember Jack, who I shared a bench with when I was a machinist. I said, "What are you making, Jack?" And he parts. And he just kind of like have this crusty, we'd even call him crusty, attitude that isolated himself. And that would work in the world where humans were just muscle. But now we're trying to facilitate conversations, and the faster we can communicate is the more valuable we are. So to me, it's about building relationships. Again, that's why we kind of set our booth up the way we did, to facilitate relationships. But building relationships and trust is the most important thing anybody can do.
What is... I'm wondering if I know what your answer on this is going to be. What are some of the most underrated trust-building tactics in today's manufacturing world? Because people are on social media, people do the dinners, people do the events. What do you think is one of the most underrated strategies in this day and age?
Vulnerability.
Vulnerability, okay.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. What does vulnerability look like in practice?
A willingness to say when you're wrong.
Yeah.
A willingness to be vulnerable and share where you're at. It actually, you build trust when you're listening. You build trust when you allow somebody to contribute to you. And I think we kind of feel like we have more trust if we have this confidence about us.
Yeah.
And we actually build trust when it's like, you know what, I've got things I'm struggling with too. It's like, oh, you are human. You're not just an AI bot.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice to wrap our interview on. Al, I appreciate you being part of us here with the Creators Lounge. Everyone out there, we got more Creators Lounge interviews coming right up. We'll see you real soon.